it's Ashley Bookishrealm and I'm back with another video. So today I am here to do a collaboration with the lovely Temecka from Temecka. Your channel is Temecka's Library. I should have had this written down before I sat down and did this. I'm a whole mess. So Temecka and Izzy, their channels will be linked down in the description box below. They were thoughtful and kind enough, and I'm super honored that they asked me if I would be willing to do a collab video with him. So I am here today to do the collab video, and we are going to be talking about books that we don't talk about enough. And so this was really interesting for me because there are some books that like I push and I push and I push, and then I actually went through my shelves. So all of these books are books that I physically own that I've read, and I realized like these are books that I've talked about on my channel, but these are not ones that I've talked about enough, like not enough at all. So I'm here to talk a little bit about these. I believe I have 10 titles. So 10 titles that I'm going to go through, and we're going to kind of talk a little bit about them. If you hear breathing or chewing in the background, my little one is currently up and kind of hanging out while I do this. So this is usually we wait until she is asleep, but for today, not really a thing. So the first one that I have on my list is one that I have not read in a while, but it is one of my favorite middle grade books, and it actually was published in 2000. And honestly, it's a cross between what I feel like is middle grade and YA. I think depending upon what library you go to, it can be classified as either. And that book is Fever 1793 by Lori Halse Anderson. So I've talked quite a bit about Lori Halse Anderson, but more so in reference to her young adult book Speak, when I talk about books that have been banned or challenged and the history of YA. That book tends to come up a lot in those discussions. But Fever 1793 is another one that she's written, and I haven't really talked about this one much on my channel, and it's one that I really enjoy. It takes place in 1793. It is about yellow fever, and we follow a main character by the name of Maddie as she navigates being a part of this pandemic. I don't know if this is one that people are going to want to read right now, considering that our world is still kind of low-key topsy-turvy, but it is a great historical fiction book, one of my favorite historical fiction books, and one that I definitely do not recommend enough. The next one that I have on my list is actually another historical fiction, and it is another one. I actually would say that this one is more YA because of content than middle grade, but it is another historical fiction by one of my favorite OG writers, and that is Copper Sun by Sharon Draper. This is one that I have not read in a very long time either. So actually a lot of these books I haven't read in quite a while, and I have a tendency to reread, and these are some of my favorites. So this one is another historical fiction. It is a slave narrative that follows a character by the name of Amari, and she is paired up with an indentured servant, and they are trying to make their way to Florida in order for them both to be free in a sense. And so this one does have some darker themes, darker elements, but it doesn't really cross that line. So when I say slave narrative, I wouldn't think in the vein of like Yellow Wife, which was very graphic. This is targeted towards a young adult audience, so it literally fades to black before we get to any super dark scenes, but a lot of those scenes are insinuated. What I really love about this is that the sanctuary that they're searching for in Florida is based on a Spanish colony that did exist like really in real life. And so I love that Sharon Draper actually did a lot of research and work in order to incorporate this narrative into this book. In the back of the book, she also provides a good list of resources for teachers and for students, and just basically just websites and stuff that people can check out if they're interested in the actual history of this book. So I love when authors do that to provide students, particularly with better context of the history that they're discussing in their books. Now this next one is one that I actually have done a full review on, but like when I did that full review, I don't think I've really talked about it much since then. And this was a book that I finally picked up in 2020 and really enjoyed it, and it is Genesis Begins Again by Alicia D. Williams. This one is also one that kind of floats between middle grade and YA. I think it depends on how you see the content of where you would put it. This is an award-winning, it's stacked Newbery Honor, Coretta Scott King Award, and William C. Morris Debut Award finalist. So shout out to Alicia for doing the thing. And so if you don't know anything about Genesis Begins Again, this book follows a girl by the name of Genesis that deals with a lot of different things. This is not an easy book. There is a huge discussion of texturism, colorism, racism, and being a part of a family where you have a parent who's dealing with alcoholism and you have a family member that is perpetuating internalized racism. And so she grows up really dealing with a whole lot and wanting to bleach and lighten her skin and change her hair because she doesn't feel like she's beautiful enough because she's dark skinned and her hair is of a coarser nature. Like she really has a lot of internal conflict that ends up having to be resolved, and it really doesn't come to a resolution. I won't say that there's a resolution to this, but it's a lot of unlearning of very awful generational things that she's pretty much had ingrained in her. Like her grandmother is really, gosh, it was so sad because her grandmother is the type of person who would push, like, you know, having a lighter complexion and having a different type of hair, and that makes you a better person. And this is a good example of the things that happen within the Black community and not necessarily always what happens on the outside of the Black community. Once again, like I said, this one also was not an easy read. It is definitely on the darker end because we're dealing with such heavy themes and heavy topics, but it's definitely worth, it's well worth, y'all. It is so well worth a read. I absolutely adored it, and I will be sure to link the review that I did in the cards above because I believe that I reviewed this, a picture book, and the Vanishing Half as kind of like a trio type of thematic review. Next one that I have on my list is probably kind of pushing it a little bit and is one of the only graphic works that I actually do have on here because I do have a tendency to really heavily talk about my comics and graphic novels and stuff, but there's one particular character that I don't feel like I talk about enough, and that is Wonder Woman. So I have other bind-ups of Wonder Woman, but I decided just to choose this one, which is the Future State Wonder Woman, and also features Wonder Girl, but I also have stuff that deals with Nubia. I really just adore Wonder Woman as a character. She has a lot of strength in the world of DC that people don't really realize, which is why a lot of true, like, hardcore DC fans did not like the second movie that was done by DC for Wonder Woman, because she just essentially loses everything about her that we know to be true of Wonder Woman. She's very powerful. This is a woman that has both, like, handled Superman and Batman with no problem. Okay, this is a character that also is at the forefront of what DC is doing with Future State. She is like the main person when it comes to all of the stuff that's currently happening in the DC universe. When there was this huge event that happened before Future State, she was the center of that. She's a very important character to the DC narrative, and I often feel like I don't talk about her enough. Like, I talk about DC at large, I talk about all the things that DC has done in terms of their comics, but solely focusing on Wonder Woman is something that I have not done yet, and I think it's something that I definitely want to consider in the future because she is such an iconic character, and I think that sometimes people don't realize how, like, literally how iconic of a character she is. The next one that I have on here are actually two books that I'm supposed to be reading for the year 2022. These books I talked a little bit about in my 22 books to read in 2022. I don't know why I couldn't get that out. So this is the Wings of Fire series. This is a middle grade fantasy series by 2T Sutherland that I had picked up probably starting in like 2019. It is one of my favorite middle grade fantasy series, and it is unique in the sense that these books are told from the perspective of the dragons. In the first 5 books, we are following the original members of the Dragonette prophecy. So these are 5 dragonettes, younger dragons, who are responsible for possibly helping save the dragon world. So the dragons are split into different groups based on their abilities. So you have like mud wings, you have dark wings, and there's just a lot of interesting elements. It's a lot of political things that are happening, which I always find political fantasy to be really interesting. So it's very interesting, in fact, to have a middle grade fantasy series that is based on a political intrigue, but from the perspective of dragons. And so I think humans do come into the picture maybe more so as the series goes on, but in these first few books that I read, I've read the first 3 books, they don't necessarily play like a huge role so far, but I absolutely adore these. They are more graphic than what I expected to be middle grade fantasy, but they're quick and easy reads. This is an extensive universe. I think there's about 14 or 15 books out. I know at the library, like, these move like crazy. Like, kids love these, and I definitely can see why kids love these so much. All right, so the next author is probably going to come as a surprise to most people because I don't necessarily talk about a lot of classics on my channel, but I used to read a lot more classics than what I read now. I have delved into other genres, and so classics has kind of taken a back seat, but I do want to dive back in to classics. I watch a couple of booktubers who are really heavy classic readers, and so they've kind of been motivating me to dive back into classics. But there is an author that I really enjoy, and I never ever really talk about her on my channel, and I think it's so fascinating that I've never really talked about her on my channel, and I have read I think maybe 3 of her books, and that's Jane Austen. It's very surprising. Like, I have not talked about Jane Austen on my channel, I think, at all. And maybe like in the beginning when I was, you know, doing content creation, like 2014, 2015, I never really talked about Jane Austen. And it's so interesting because I enjoy Jane Austen. As a matter of fact, the other book of hers that I have sitting around is Persuasion, which the adaptation for Persuasion came out on Netflix last week. And so a lot of people were rereading Persuasion and watching the Netflix adaptation. My favorite book by her is actually Sense and Sensibility. And it's been years since I've read both Persuasion and Sense and Sensibility. But I like Jane Austen for very unique reasons. I think she does a great job of looking at social commentary. So I don't necessarily read her books for the romantic elements. I know that some people do, and they enjoy the romantic elements, but these books for me, I love because of the fact that they gave social commentary to what was going on in the time that Jane Austen was living. And so that's typically why I gravitate towards picking up her books. I've read Pride and Prejudice several times because it was required reading in high school, and then I would read it for fun, and I love all the adaptations. And so I think it's high time that I do a reread of Jane Austen's works, which I should have done it this month because it's Jane Austen July, but I just had not had the opportunity to do it. But I adore her stuff, and I just never talk about her. And I actually don't talk about classics enough on my channel because it's been so long since I've really picked up classics, and I just need to do better. The next one that I have is interesting because I actually don't have a Dutch jacket for it, but the book that I am talking about is The Astonishing Color of After by Emily X.R. Pan. I never talk about this book. In fact, Emily X.R. Pan has now come up with another book, but this is one that I really enjoyed. It took me a while to get through it, but I did enjoy it when I did have the opportunity to read it. And it focuses on a girl who has just lost her mother. Her mother has committed suicide, and so she starts seeing, I believe it's a red bird. She starts seeing this red bird, and it's connecting her back to her parents' history and how they met and what her mother was going through. This book tackles mental health in a very interesting way, and it is a heartbreaking book. It is a heart-wrenching book. It was a book that definitely made me feel emotional, but once again, I loved that in the back of this book, the author did end up providing resources, especially with suicide prevention for suicide loss survivors and understanding mental illness. And so this one was, oh gosh, y'all, this was so beautifully written. Just the lyrical aspects of the text really drew me in, and it's one that I think you have to take your time with because of the fact that there's so many different elements tied to this, and you have to pay such close attention to everything because it comes full circle article at the end of the book. And so this is one that I definitely did take my time with. It's one that like I said, I annotated this one and really enjoyed it, and I don't talk about it enough, and I need to talk about it more, and I need to do a reread of it. The next one that I have is one that I have not read the sequel to yet, and I'm so upset at myself that I haven't read the sequel to this one yet. But this is The War That Saved My Life. This is a middle grade book that is a Newbery honor. It was written by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. If you know anything about this author, they write gut-wrenching stuff. I read another book by them, which I'm losing the title of that book, but I'll put it up on the screen. And it was one of my favorites of last year. This is one of my favorites by Kimberly as well. It follows a young girl that is disabled. Her foot is twisted, and so she has a difficulty walking, and her mother is so mean to her. So this takes place during World War II. So if you didn't know, during World War II, children were often sent to the countryside when they were living in the city to protect them from the bombings that were happening during World War II. So it has that element, and our main character, Ada, her brother is sent off to the countryside, and she sneaks off to be with him, and they're both sent to a woman by the name of Susan. And what we end up seeing in this one is that Ada finally gets a family. So it has a found family trope, and the way that Susan treats her is absolutely beautiful. I think that she becomes, in essence, the mother that she never has, because her mother is just so awful to her. And so it's great getting the opportunity to see her get the family that she deserves from the beginning. And there's a lot of historical aspects to this book. It's been a while since I've read this one, and I have the sequel. I haven't read the sequel yet, but I am looking forward to, once again, I just need to reread all of these, because clearly I haven't talked about them in a very long time. But I'm looking forward to rereading this one and finally getting to the sequel. The next one that I don't talk about enough is Like Water for Chalk. This is one that I've read twice, I believe. I read it once in high school. I read it once, I think, after I graduated from college, and I do not talk about this one at all, and I love it. The magical realism about it is completely and totally fascinating. If you didn't know, the story itself is told by a narrator who's telling the story about their great aunt Tita. And so Tita has this gift where she can evoke emotions in someone in her cooking. So like if she feels sad when she's cooking something, then when the person eats, they too will feel sad. So it has that magical realism aspect of it. And so it is a family history of sorts, and a story about Tita, and it's so beautiful and heartbreaking, honestly. What I really enjoy about this book too is that each one of these chapters starts with a recipe in the beginning, and so I would love to go back and reread this and actually do some of the recipes. But like I said, this is one I haven't read in a while either. I haven't read any of these in a while. I haven't read this one in a while, but it's one that I definitely don't talk about. It's enough, and it's one that I have enjoyed. The last ones on my list are some middle grade graphic novels that I don't talk about. It's by the DC Zoom imprint, and so DC was doing this imprint where they were creating middle grade graphic novels that were accessible for younger readers who were interested in the world of DC. So I have a whole bunch of them here that I don't talk about. There are only two in this pile that I actually have not read, and the two that I have not read is Batman Overdrive and Dear Justice League. So these are two that I have not read, but I do have 4 that I've read here that I have not talked enough. I haven't talked about these enough at all. I've read all of these. So I've read Anti-Hero, I've read The Secret Spiral of Swamp Kid, I've read Diana, Princess of the Amazons, and also Black Canary Ignite. These are really good, y'all. I love these because of the fact that they create a sense of accessibility for younger readers who are into Marvel and DC. And of course, with the adult comics, you have to think about it in terms of content, but also just DC and Marvel are very complicated worlds, and so having something like these to jumpstart younger readers on enjoying DC, I absolutely love that they have this line. I don't know if they've put anything out lately in regard to these, but I will definitely check it out. And I do need to, like I said, I do have these two that I do need to finish, but I'm glad that I have had the opportunity to read at least 4 of these. All right, y'all, so that is it. I hope y'all have gotten some recommendations from this video. These are books that, like, I need to talk about these books more. I don't know why I haven't talked about them more, but I need to talk about them more. And so let me know in the comment box below, like, books that you feel like maybe you haven't seen booktubers talk about enough and that you would like to see more booktubers read. And make sure that you also check out Izzy and Temecka's videos. So what I'll do is probably when their videos go live, I'll go back and make sure that I add them to this video. As always, if you like this video, make sure to give a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to see more content, hit the bell for notification. If you're looking for ways to support the channel, make sure you check out my Patreon as well as my Amazon wishlist below. And thank you so much again to Temecka and Izzy for allowing me to be a part of this. I really, really appreciate y'all. Much love. All right, y'all.